So I've been using the iPhone 15 Pro for 2 weeks now. I've seen all the headlines, I've seen everything about the phone from other people, but this video is about my perspective and how I've been finding my use case of this phone so far. And I think the first place to start above everything else is the battery life. For anyone who wants a all-day battery life phone that you're going to be using for quite a bit during the day, this is probably not the one for you. I'll be open and honest about it. I've required having an Apple Watch and using my iPad mini to become a all-day device more than anything. Because my Apple Watch basically means that I can read all my texts, generally speaking, reply to most things, and get all of my basic notifications out the way. And also, control things like music without having to open up the phone itself. However, the phone is still really great, generally speaking, but that battery life was really disappointing to see. I remember my first day using it, having it go down from 90% charge to 20 within the space of 6 hours was ridiculous. Yes, I was using it for about 2.5 hours, 3 hours, but still. To lose that much battery within that period of time when all I'm doing is watching YouTube and maybe scrolling Instagram was insane, and generally, setting up the phone. But overall, I wasn't that impressed about the battery life. However, there is redeeming factors to this phone that I've absolutely loved. One of them has to be its size. Now obviously, it's no different to prior ones, however, for me, if you didn't watch my unboxing video, you can always check that out, it'll be right at the top somewhere up here. But when it comes to it, I've downsized from every single year using a Pro Max model, and honestly, after the 2 weeks of using this, whenever I pick up my girlfriend's phone or my second one that's just all for business work, it's just ridiculous holding those. They feel like actual tablets. I now understand where that notion comes from when people talk about the bigger devices. But with the smaller size, it has meant that things like I said, my Apple Watch gets used way more, and also using things like my iPad mini actually becomes something of value instead of just using something that gives you an extra 2 to maybe 2.5 inches of display. Now, one thing that was shown all over the place is the build quality, more particularly on the Pro Max model, as the Pro is still a bit more, smaller, denser and so on, so it doesn't snap as easily, or at least crack down the back of it. However, for most people, don't do that. I think that's the simple answer to most things. Just don't do it, okay? Just don't start bending your phone. But with its build quality, I absolutely love it. I love the change in design. The titanium rails feel so much smoother and nicer to hold, and overall, it's been a lot more of a nicer experience. Originally, I said in my unboxing video, I wasn't sure how I felt about the weight of it, but I've come to grips with using it. I'm used to it now. It feels perfectly fine. I do still feel like it being heavier would have been okay. I wouldn't have had any issues with it. However, obviously, some people want a lighter phone, so that will work for you if that is what you're after. Now though, let's talk about the cameras, as I do think a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about cameras, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, for one big reason, and that is, there's not really much difference. If everyone was honest about it, most tech reviewers were honest about it, there isn't a big difference. Most things, in terms of what most people are taking photos of, you're not going to notice any difference between this, a 14, or even possibly a 13. The 13 has a 12 megapixel camera on it. This has a 48, it also does the 24 crop with one of the other lenses, I believe it's a crop, but generally it is the case that nobody's going to notice, nobody's going to really care when you are actually using the phone. It's more just numbers that most people will never really understand or never really care in the first place about. When you're actually using it in a use case scenario, it's something that I'm really interested to see if people really could tell massive amounts of differences if they had the photos lined up on Instagram. Because that's where most people see their photos. It already gets downscaled, all those sorts of things. So generally, is it too much of like a big difference? No, I wouldn't say it's a reason to upgrade to this phone. However, it is definitely nice that you get 24 megapixels on the 2x instead of 12. Then we've got one of the bigger things that they talked about on this phone, which was the action button. Yes, the thing that honestly I've forgotten half the time exists. That might just be me, but from what I've seen from other creators online, they all seem to have the same sort of experience, which is you use it for maybe the first day, maybe the second day, but generally you kind of forget about its usage. I do think that it's just a bit too high up on the phone. It could have just been gone entirely, to be honest. They wouldn't have had to even told us about the button, or even, lowered it a little bit, so it was actually something that you could grab pretty easily with your hand instead of having to bring your hand all the way up to the top of the phone to start clicking on it. For me, I've just not really found it that useful. For you, you might absolutely love it. Let's say you're someone who likes to take voice memos on the go and you want easy access to straight away start recording. that might work for you. Or let's say you want Google Assistant instead of Siri to start activating, then that might work perfect for you. But overall, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is, again, a big reason to upgrade, as the action button doesn't really play a pivotal role in the experience of this phone. The smaller bezels were nice to see, and generally, again, the display is similar to every single year of the Pro models very recently. The 120Hz ProMotion display, and then on top of that, it's got slimmer bezels, which is, again, it's nice, it is noticeable. You actually do realize, originally I was kind of worried that it wouldn't be that noticeable, but it definitely is, especially in comparison to the 14 Pro. But again, is this something that, you know, most people will care about? Not really. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but I do think this year is probably, sadly, one of the more disappointing years generally, and I think it's just the plateau that we've hit in tech where there isn't too much innovation every year. But one thing that I do think is that a lot of people believe that everyone, or loads of people, believe in the notion of upgrading yearly, when in reality most people don't. Most people don't upgrade yearly, maybe bi-yearly, but outside of that, it's very rare that someone upgrades every single year. So this might actually be a suitable upgrade if, let's say, you're on a 13 Pro, but even then, I'd still say it's not necessarily worth it just yet. Now, one thing that was spoken about quite highly was obviously USB-C charging. Now, I've had a weird sense of, like, I don't think it's necessarily a big deal, but I also think it opens the floodgates to so much. And it's this weird thing. So on the surface, USB-C isn't really, like, it doesn't really matter too much. Like, if you're thinking about it overall, transfer speeds on the Pro, you at least get USB 3.0 transfer speeds, which is great, means you can just transfer stuff pretty easily. However, on the surface level, it's just a change of port. It doesn't really do too much. However, when you dive a little bit deeper into it, with something like, you know, my minimal tech carry that I did about a week ago, you actually see that there is a lot more value to be gained. And what I mean by that is that, let's say, instead of carrying a cable to charge your AirPods and as well your Apple Watch, then instead you could get a little adapter that has a Apple Watch charger on it. And what that does is it means that you can just plug this tiny little thing in and charge both of them off the bottom of your iPhone, which can be really great. So it does open up a lot more possibilities. It does mean things like taking photos on, let's say, your big main camera like I do when we're traveling. It does mean that I can now edit them just off my phone. It kind of starts to go into the realms of getting rid of the use case of an iPad in many people's situations. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the A17 Pro chip, which again, it's cool. It's nice that we'll be able to run games like Assassin's Creed Mirage on it, Resident Evil Village, and that sort of thing. But again, does this change much for most people? Not really. For most people, the A16 was already powerful enough. The A15 was already powerful enough for most people's use cases. This is definitely cool. It's a step in a different direction, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's something that is hyper, like, you know, a groundbreaking thing that we needed. Obviously, the change in the actual chip itself was really impressive. So yeah, the chip is a 3 nanometer chip with 19 billion transistors, which is insane. It's obviously ridiculously powerful, but again, for most people, I wouldn't say this phone is necessarily a go out and buy. You need to go get this, or this is the upgrade for you. I'd say if you're on like a 12, 13, maybe, but if you're on a 14, I would definitely say stray away. There's no need right now. If you're on a 12, that's where I'd say the sweet spot is to upgrade to a 15. I wouldn't necessarily say if you're on a 13, it's necessarily a good value for money option. But that's just me. If it is the case that this phone is perfect for you, let me know down below in the comments. If it's the case that you've been using yours, let me know what you think of it. So far, I've definitely had the experience of, it's just another iPhone, doesn't change too much. It's been a nice different experience for me as it's been a downsize. However, overall, it's not been something that necessarily has impacted my life because of these groundbreaking changes in subtle ways that most of us generally don't find too much use cases out of. I will be making a video at some point in the future talking about the new OSs, one on the iPhone, on the Apple Watch, and as well as that on the iPad. However, for now, I'm waiting until everything's released so that I can make a full video discussing it, as one of my favourite things that I'm looking forward to is the Journal app once that makes it to the iPhone. So with that all being said, if you guys do enjoy tech videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I upload twice a week on here. And if you want any other things like extra photos and that sort of thing, go check out Adams_tech_. Sadly, I couldn't get Adams Tech, but there you go. You can always check that out over on Instagram. And if you do want to check out this phone, it'll be linked down below with an affiliate link, and I'll see you guys in the next video on Wednesday. Have a good one.